this time.
Got it.
Hello. So we're back with Deep Images and another Halloween panel. This one will be our last one that we're shooting till next year. I know, it's sad. And so this is one that Tim Tolbert, our executive producer and sometimes co-host, uh, sketched out a while back. What is horror? So his whole title was "What is Horror? An Exploration of the Indefinable." So that's pretty heavy. So we're gonna try to live up to that if we can. That he told me I'll go ahead and put this as an introduction because he may not be making it tonight. He said that what inspired him to have that idea is when Oppenheimer came out, people were arguing it was a horror movie, and he said he thought that was patently ridiculous. And so so we're going to kind of get into the weeds with all this kind of stuff about what constitutes a horror movie, and there's things to consider like subgenres and genre crossovers. And the graphic that I picked for the corner here is Planet of the Vampires by Mario Bava. So that's one that is, to me, obviously a science fiction movie, but it's also, to me, obviously a horror movie. And it inspired one of the many things that inspired Alien, much more well known, which I also think is both. So Kaelyn had an outline of some ideas and questions for a conversation, and then I've got some notes too, and everybody else is going to kind of piggyback off each other, as Keith says. So and he'll be with us later. So Kaelyn, what do you think about your very well put together ideas?
Thanks. Y'all are getting the polished version, of course. Behind the scenes, it's a little messier, but one of the kind of first definitions that I found while I was kind of learning about, like, okay, what makes something horror, what makes it not horror, is the idea that horror, specifically as compared to thriller, is something that has supernatural elements and that is designed to give you feelings of horror or terror where you're scared something is going to happen to you while you're watching it. Although maybe not literally. We understand difference between fiction and reality. At least I
we do.
I pretend to.
Don't.
I pretend to. It's all fake. Anyway, and my initial gut reaction to that was, well, no, because I can think of lots of horror movies off the top of my head that are just about humans being evil and scary and messed up and just bad things happening. And yes, sometimes supernatural elements can be terrifying, but I don't think they're required for something to be horror. So that was kind of the first question that I had going into all of this. And I'm curious what all of you think about that as well. Like, does it have to have supernatural elements, or can something that is just about humans be horror too?
One of the most successful horror franchises, Scream. There's not a drop of supernatural in any of it. But I can't imagine anyone arguing they're not horror films.
Yeah.
Saw has no supernatural.
Or Halloween or Friday the 13th.
Right.
What'd you say, buddy?
At least not at first.
Well, Friday the 13th or Halloween are slasher films, but there's not obviously any supernatural element to it at first, anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, like when I was a kid, I saw, because like I'm a child of the 90s. I saw like all of that kind of stuff growing up. And so to me, like slasher films like from the 80s and 90s are kind of core to what the horror genre is, because that's what I grew up with. And that was my kind of formative impression of the genre. So to me, it's like, well, obviously slasher films are horror. Why would you say they're not?
Well, it goes back to this lineage that I always, because I'm always trying to hype people to Italian horror if they're not already into it, because to me that's kind of some of the pinnocles of the genre.
I love a good giallo.
And well, yeah, with giallo. And so I was explaining this to somebody recently, the evolution from the krimis, which were German films, which were based around basically just like murder mystery novels like Agatha Christie, but especially Edgar Wallace, who's more famous for co-creating King Kong. But they adapted a ton of Edgar Wallace stuff. They were mostly black and white German movies, and some of the earliest Klaus Kinski appearances were in those movies. And I would classify those as horror. They were more like thrillers and murder mysteries. But my mom, for instance, was a big murder mystery buff, but she didn't consider those horror movies because they didn't have supernatural. Also, they weren't as violent. Overtly, murder was treated more like it is in by Jessica Fletcher, which Murder She Wrote. That's barely even a murder mystery, much less horror. But as far as the way that evolved, basically the Italians got a hold of the Krimis, and they already had these publications that were lurid with similar kinds of stories called giallos, because they had predominantly yellow paper. And finally, this wonderful guy Mario Bava, whose film I just cited over here, Planet of the Vampires, hope you all can see it. He's one of the most important filmmakers ever, but definitely in genre cinema. And he really codified the giallo, because he kind of took the ideas with the Krimis, with the murder mystery and the black and white photography, and he brought it over to The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which, of course, the title is also a riff on Alfred Hitchcock, who was a huge influence on giallos, but also, maybe the biggest influence on thriller / horror, and that kind of, his movies definitely, skirted that vein until they got more and more extreme, like Psycho, etc. But yeah, and then the giallos kind of developed in the 60s. Once they went color, they got more lurid, like the giallo books, a lot more sexuality than the German krimis. And by the 70s, anything goes with giallos. I mean, the lot of sex, a lot of violence, a lot of sexual violence, a lot of insane convoluted twists, a lot of sub genres. Like, you'll find a current of movies that current of films that maybe 3 or 4 that had a certain kind of element, but they're still giallo. So then you get into, is it a giallo? And again, with horror, I'm all more inclusive. So I've seen up to now, I believe, almost 200 giallos, and a lot of them people would not think are giallos off the top of their head, but I would definitely argue that they are. And there are also Spanish giallos. Usually they were co-productions with Italy, but they were very, very firmly Spanish films, and they have a flavor kind of their own. Eloy de la Iglesia is a really great example of that. Jorge Grau. But then there were a few Greek ones. It was a very European thing after a while. And when we got to the 70s, you've got people like Brian De Palma, who is influenced by Hitchcock, and Brian De Palma and Dario Argento are coming up concurrently, and it's like, who's ripping off who? You'll watch one of their movies and the other, and they kind of feed into each other. And I don't think either of them has ever admitted they ripped off the other, but it's very obvious there's a synergy going on, and I find it hard to believe they didn't see each other's films.
Rip off is such a cruel term when you could.
It is a cruel term, and I don't
homage.
Homage, inspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and homage to me, though, is when it's really obvious and when it's acknowledged. Rip-off is kind of when it's like neither. It's kind of like, hey, no one's going to notice.
Pretending you're original.
I feel like inspiration might be appropriate then, because it's like they're inspiring each other, right? It's like you've got people over here doing one thing, you got people over here doing something else. They see each other's stuff, that inspires them to make more stuff, which inspires the other one to make more stuff.
Agree.
And that's how you get.
That's ideal, but I think if you know about Dario Argento and Brian De Palma, they're both pretty cocky dudes. I mean, they're not they're very egotistical. So
they're making movies.
They are ripping off. They're kind of like.
But to me, homage is when you do it well, and rip off is when you screw it up.
Well, that's
or don't give credit where it's due.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and rip off and knock off. There's a fine line there too. But
you were talking about what is horror. I mean, there are people who will argue that Psycho isn't horror, and you're like, what are you talking about? We killed off the leading lady.
Same thing
in
with
the first
Silence
half
of the
hour.
Lambs.
We got a skeleton sitting. Silence of the Lambs is where I'll die on that hill. Listen, if someone wants to call anything horror, even if it's really not, I'll be like, if it affected you that way, sure, why not? But when they try to deny Silence of the Lambs, we've got 2 killers. One's a cannibal, and one carves up women and makes a suit out of their skin. Yeah, it's
that's horror.
Come on, folks. And you see a lot now. But there are. Look,
I don't consider lot of snobbery. I think
it's interesting. Henry, they
snobbery.
used to say the Krimis are horror. I didn't really think of them that way, but I could see that makes sense. But I would not consider Agatha Christie to be horror.
Right. She's kind of on the edge.
That's more thriller.
People are trapped on an island. They're being killed off one by one. That's the exact same plot of Twitch of the Death Nerve, which everyone says that's horror. So why? But Agatha Christie they're sipping tea with English accents before they disappear, and
Right.
they have very tasteful deaths.
It's genteel.
Yeah.
So, Kaelyn, I think that thing that you put when you posted it, that great famous quote totally applies. It's like what they said about pornography.
Yeah.
I can't define it, but I know it when I see it, and
Exactly.
I feel that way a lot about horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. Like it's horror because it gives you that feeling, right? Because the whole point of the horror genre is that it elicits that fear response. Or if you're like you, maybe you're a little numb to it, but for most moviegoers, it's gonna elicit that response, and that's one of the driving things of the movie. I also wouldn't say that that's like the main one or the most important one, but I think it's one of them for sure.
If it horrifies you, it's by definition there's a horror as part of it. I mean, there's that element.
Cats is a horror film.
Cats is a great example.
Horrify you as
well, that could make Oppenheimer a horror film if you're going to argue that.
Like, I will.
Cats based on.
It's a stretch.
Hold on, Francis.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Is Cats based on a Nick Sharman book novel? I think in the late 1970s, or is this completely?
Which Cats are we talking about? The Broadway thing?
I was talking about the Broadway thing.
Yeah, that's based on the T.S. Eliot poetry.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah. So the Cats horror terror of a movie that came out 4 years ago, oh my god, is based on the Broadway musical, which is based on T.S. Eliot's book, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, which is a poetry collection that is very whimsical and very just delightful. And then they made the Broadway musical Cats. It is great. I love it. I will die on that hill. It's a great musical. I don't care. And then they did the thing that happens when you adapt Broadway musicals into films, where it either goes very, very well or it goes very, very poorly, and there is no in between.
Yeah, because there's one horror novel by Nick Sharman. I think it came out in 1979 called Cats, and it's just cats killing people.
See, that's
my god! I know what novel you're talking about. It's not the same thing though. But
I know now. But I mean,
would have been better
where it came from.
We only hear when you bring it up.
Cats know if you have a cat, you are constantly living in a horror movie because you never know what they're up to when you hear weird noises.
Yeah, I don't know where mine is, and that kind of scares me. Hopefully, I'll make a benign cameo. Yeah. I wanted to close off what Kaelyn said. I was kind of meandering in that direction, but I wanted some other people to make some good points here. Is that the thing with Giallos is that when we got back to Mario Bava, and Bill brought up this movie. So Bay of Blood, or Ecology of Terror, or Carnage, or Twitch of the Death Nerve. So that's a key film. That's a 1971 film. And then that one, they took the Giallo, and he basically created the slasher film. He took it into, the killing one by one. Again, it's an Agatha Christie idea. They're on an island. And in that case, there's a summit of rich oligarchs and an ecological technological backdrop. Same thing he did earlier in $5 for an August Moon, exactly, which also is pretty violent. But this one just goes completely all out. And then once that is codified, there's a definite line of demarcation, because Sean Cunningham worked with Wes Craven, and they did films together, and he ended up directing Friday the 13th after he'd worked on Wes Craven's early movies. But he also distributed pornography and horror films and foreign films. And one of the ones he distributed was Bay of Blood as Twitch of the Death Nerve. I don't know if he coined that term, but he distributed it as that movie. So within the movie Twitch of the Death Nerve, there is a subplot of sorts. There's a meta level where there's a soothsayer, a fortune teller, played by the ubiquitous, if you're in the Italian cinema, Laura Betti, and Pasolini's good buddy. And she tells this tale about this kind of crazed woman whose son is kind of a freak, and he's murdered, and she goes crazy. So that right there, Sean Cunningham just said, hey, well, I'm going to make that a movie out of the movie that I was distributing. So this goes back to in his case, I would definitely use the term ripoff because it's very crass, because not uncredited. But not only did he do that for the first Friday the 13th movie, he actually told that story. But then in the second movie, and especially the third, he actually literally almost shot for shot took kills out of Twitch of the Death Nerve and reenacted them again, uncredited. Later on, as Mario Bava became more well known among cult circles, it was like, oh yeah, I distributed that movie, and oh yeah, it was a big influence on me, and I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, but but that's kind of how the American slasher, that's the beginning, was Twitch of the Death Nerve, and of course then there's a couple of movies like. Arguably, Black Christmas and Massacre at Central High are both kind of benchmarks, arguably, as are these the first, I was going to say American, but Black Christmas is Canadian, slashers. But then, of course, come Halloween, and it's like, okay, this is definitely, a genre or subgenre of itself. And like you said, it was the predominant subgenre of horror in the 80s, at least commercially. But that's just in America, and of course, we talked about America and Italy, and well, anyway, before we get international stuff or transnational stuff, I like that phrase used. What are some other things you wanted to explore? Because you had a couple other good points there.
Yeah. So some other ones. I guess one other good one to kind of go into, since this kind of came up a little bit so far, is like if you have really horrifying themes in a film. Is that enough to justify it as horror? Like thematic stuff. So like, some of the films that we've talked about before, like including in our post-apocalyptic thing, like I would argue, for example, Snowpiercer is definitely horror. Oh my God, you have this realization that 1, they're eating ground up cockroaches, and 2, they are getting small children to crawl into the machinery to operate it. That's horror. Akira, definitely horror. Threads, definitely horror. I feel like all of those, a lot of those definitely fit in.
Akira, I think fits in because, I mean, it's definitely science fiction, it's definitely post-apocalyptic, but I think the horrific elements, once you start getting into the mutating children and the whole like scary children kind of trope, and
let's not talk about the body horror at the end. Oh my God, that was disgusting.
It's got a monster. By definition, if it's got a monster, it's horror.
It's literally a kaiju, so there you go.
When people say it's not horror, it's science fiction, it's like that's like saying Bone Tomahawk can't be a Western and a horror. It has to be one or the other.
No, it's definitely
science
both.
fiction. Science fiction just is it taking place in the future? Does it have elements of technology we don't have yet? It could be a love science fiction, horror science fiction, mystery science fiction is like Westerns. It's a time, a place. It doesn't negate anything else you put in there. So anyone who says aliens not horror, like I really don't want to live on the same planet.
I'll die on that hill.
Yeah,
let me ask you guys about this movie.
Sci-fi horror.
Here's an example I bet a lot of you have seen, I hope, here. Under the Skin. So that's obviously science fiction, but it really is kind of plays sort of like horror. Are you guys familiar with this film at all?
I'm not.
I haven't actually seen it, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
Is that Pedro?
No, it's Michael Brian Glazer. It's
with Almodovar, when you're just thinking of Skin, it's literally just Skin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Under the Skin is based on a novel, and it's an A24 film, so of course it's got heavy. A24 has its own subset of horror fans, and they argue amongst themselves what is horror and what isn't, and all those other stuff. That's a group that I had to stop getting notifications from because they're just so, but they put out a lot. A24 itself puts out a lot of good movies, and a lot of them are horror or genre bending horror. But Under the Skin is one of my favorite ones that they had distributed. And I just wondered if you guys have seen it. Well, I strongly recommend it if you want a horror science fiction, but it's also an abstract kind of experimental film. It is a narrative film, but it's out there. It's definitely by far the weirdest thing Scarlett Johansson has ever appeared in. And to her credit, she does an incredible job. I almost thought, wow, I mean, because, her usual salary could easily have, paid for the whole movie. So I would be curious. I haven't researched it if she waived her usual fee or not to be in it, just to, do it because it's so interesting. But her character, Esserly, I think's her name. She's an alien predator. Literally, but there's a lot of twists to it, and there's a lot of very abstract and a lot of disturbing scenes in it. So that's why I brought that one.
Well, she's always said that she's been more interested in making indie films, and she just happened to get cast in these bigger films. So I mean, because she really made her name. She really made her films like Ghost World and Man Who Wasn't There. That's what really brought her to attention, and then they started casting her in these big movies. But she's always had a thing for going back to indie films.
She has, but I've seen interviews like that too. But she also kind of doesn't exactly go hunting for it. I mean, I think she likes the $25 million movie paycheck.
Yeah, I'm sure she does.
She does not go out.
I mean, that's not a bad salary. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, you're right. She started with Ghost World, but to my knowledge, Under the Skin is the only movie of that nature she's done in the last 20 some years. I think she's a little disingenuous, but I do think she came out legitimately of that scene, and it'd be nice if she did more. But someone who I think is a better example, someone who I think is a better example of that, who does waive the money a lot of times, is Jennifer Lawrence.
I love Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah.
Mother, I mean, she did Mother, and that was not to her a stretch at all to do Mother. You know, it was to her fans, her core fans. You know, she'll do anything, and she will take a lower fee. She doesn't have kind of the look at me, I'm a sex symbol like Scarlett does. Jennifer is gorgeous, but she's very much about the work, especially for someone so young. Not that she hasn't been in movies that I think are banal. I think she has, but I do think she tries to be conscientious about the roles she takes, you know, relatively speaking. But Mother, that's another one that I heard people arguing, is it horror or not? And to me, it's like, well, yeah. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mother, one of the ones I had on my kind of notes as like well, that's definitely horror, is Mommy Dearest.
That's the recent one, right? With the two boys. Is that right? Oh no, you're talking about the older one.
Yeah, the older one. The older one.
Oh, I'm thinking of Mommy, whatever. Yeah,
Mother.
I don't know which one you're talking about. But
are you thinking Mother's Day?
The older one.
No, I'm thinking of a recent one. It's called like Mommy, Good Night, Mommy. It's kind of a weird.
Anyway. I haven't seen that one, but
no, Good Mommy Dearest. You mean with Faye Dunaway? Oh, okay. I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I've never thought of that as a horror movie, but I could definitely see that.
I just like anything with like child abuse and like just you know, that type of thing, that like relationship of like, if you can't trust your parent, who can you trust? Is just one of those things that has always hit me like really, really hard. Especially because like for me, it's like I have a good relationship with my parents, but I've also, you know, had other family members where I'm just like, well, I'm really glad that person's not my parents. So there you go.
Well, actually, that's how the Gothic started, if you think about it. I mean, if you look at the history of horror, it's interesting. I mean, just a Gothic novel, because the first one is around 1764. It's Horace Walpole writing his Castle of Otranto, and it's got these, you know, supernatural elements. And they're obviously like, you know, they're supposed to be real and not explained. And then you've got the Old English Baron, which also has like some supernatural elements, although it's not quite as clear. They could be dreams, God knows what. But then in the 1780s and 90s, you really get the Gothic novel being written. And what's interesting about a lot of these is that it's not all the supernatural is like explained. I mean, it looks like that there's a haunting here and there, and then you find out it's something else. It's like, you know, it's usually like some criminal who's minting money, or, you know, they're having a struggling operation or something like, right. It's like, just like,
and they would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you darn kids.
And they all have, and the thing is, it's also that it was also in a way based upon all the political themes in the 1770s and 1760s, 70s, and 80s. So, you know, they're writing about how Britain is backwards. You know, the father of the country is not really a father of the country. He's too cruel and he's too brutal to be the father of the country. A lot of this imagery comes up to like, for instance, like, you know, Thomas Paine's Common Sense. But then you have this shift in parenting as well, too, saying that, you know, parents ought to be caring more about their children's general welfare. And you have something like, you know, say Mary Wollstonecraft, who incidentally was the mother of Mary Shelley. You know, she's writing about this stuff, and you have this awareness of how daughters and wives are abused by their husbands and fathers. So a lot of this stuff in the 1780s and 90s.
Like Mary Shelley's Matilda that didn't get published until 1958 because William Godwin thought it would be about, people would interpret it as being about him.
Yeah. And by the way, he wrote some quote unquote horror too. I mean, like Caleb Williams is sort of considered like Gothic, and I think he's got I think is it Saint Leon too that has like some magical elements. But anyways, I mean, the vast majority of all these horror works in the late, the 1780s and 90s, usually it's like this explains supernatural, except for The Monk. That is one that's got some supernatural elements, and it has really crazy stuff like, incest, rape, bandit robbers, things like that. And then there's the ghost of the bleeding nun. And so you've got all this, like a few of these supernatural elements. It's mostly still, realistic. It's not until you get to something like, say, Melmoth the Wanderer and actually Frankenstein, because that's 1816. That's when it was first,
1818.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think she came. What was it?
She came up with the story in 1816. It was published in 1818.
Yeah, published 1818.
And her journals refer to Matthew Lewis as Monk Lewis because that was a very influential book on her.
The first time I encountered the monk
was a favorite for her and Percy Shelley.
I was going to say the first time I encountered the monk, I didn't know about the book. It was in Phil Hardy's Encyclopedia of Horror, the version that Frank O'Neill played in, the film adaptation. And it was listed as horror, and that's what made me curious about it. I still haven't seen that version all the way through yet. Have any of y'all seen that?
The movie?
Kairu, okay. But I know Francis is really well versed on the book, and
I'm writing about the book, as a matter of fact, for University of Manchester.
Nice. That's cool.
I need to read it. It's what I haven't gotten around to.
Yeah, I'd like to read it.
Oh, you won't be disappointed. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that, you've got elements of everything in Gothic and in horror. I mean, all the elements. I mean, it's usually about, it's like a mixture of, I guess, the fear of the supernatural combined with, like, say, real life horrors, like, domestic abuse, tyranny, greed for power. And it's funny to see how a lot of this stuff like shows up in, 20th century horror, like The Shining. I mean, if you think about it, in many ways, it is kind of like an 18th century Gothic novel, because you have you've got the abusive father and husband, and then you've got all the ghosts there of, I guess they're aristocrats. And by the way, I mean, that's the thing, like in all the 18th century, the Gothics, all the bad guys are like people associated with the establishment, the aristocrats, the clerics, I mean, the ecclesiastics, they are all evil. And
you can't ever trust them.
Just like in real life.
It's like in The Exorcist. They go through all the authorities to find out what's wrong, and nobody's really helpful. And so they finally get to The Exorcist.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, because if you look at the Gothic, it is anti-authoritarian from the very, very beginning. I mean, it's really questioning of the powers that be, and that's what really takes off after the French Revolution. And if you notice in there, it's like, none of the villains are ever peasants. If they're peasants, they're usually doing something on behalf of that local aristocrat, evil aristocrat. So it's always like that. And I think like The Shining really shows that to a great degree. I mean, it really is like a transplanted 18th century novel. And by the way,
I think that changed a little bit in the 30s with Bela Lugosi as Igor, and
being peasants.
He was definitely a peasant villain, and nobody was
demonized.
But he's serving Dracula, I guess, right?
No, that was in the Frankenstein movies.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay.
But then again, in Freaks, the Freaks are the heroes.
So. Definitely.
Justin, what do you think about The Shining analysis here?
The Shining, well, I think that's a classic film. I was just going to say one of the Gothic horror films I read back at university days was Mysteries of Udolpho by
and Radcliffe.
Yeah. So I don't, because it was back in the 90s when I was there, but I do recall it was a great Gothic novel, very supernatural, and a sort of a sense of foreboding in it. So that might have been the same sort of novel also, because it was 1794. I just looked it up. It was some sort of influence on Mary Shelley, which I also read as part of that course as well, the abridged version of Frankenstein. But The Shining, I think, definitely has supernatural elements, and it's also a psycho film at the same time. But I think because of a reincarnation theme on Jack Nicholson's character, it's sort of a film I don't normally tire of. But it's got that great sense of sort of a period piece in terms of 1921 when Jack Nicholson's character was originally from in the movie. But I just think just generally it's kind of subjective about what is horror. I think a lot of films have got horror elements to them, or they're borderline as to whether they're horror or something else. But some have got horror elements without actually being horror films. So if you look at say fantasy horror with Lord of the Rings, I think even with that there's aspects of horror, particularly the first movie where Frodo is being pursued by the ringwraiths through the Shire.
That part's terrifying. God, and that part where like they're hiding behind that little bit of a cliff.
The road, yeah.
Bugs start crawling out, and Elijah Wood's like eyes roll in the back of his head. God, I hate that scene to this day. And Lord of the Rings is one of my that I watched.
He did that very well because he captured the same scenes in the book. I thought Peter Jackson very well in the films in terms of the Black Riders, the ringwraiths. And I think there's some borderline films I want to talk about as well. So if you've got a film called Duel, which is Steven Spielberg's first ever movie.
Oh, that's definitely
Duel, 1972, and I think it's a truck driver. And what I particularly liked about it is that the truck driver who menaces for no apparent reason Dennis Weaver's character while he drives to Nevada. You never actually see the truck driver apart from some winkle picker boots when he's kicking the tires. So you only really see his feet, but you don't know his motive.
And you see his arm at one point, but that's it.
Yeah, you see his arm waving Dennis Weaver to overtake while there's a car coming the other way. So that's one of my favorites. There's a recent film called Get Out, which I think is a borderline.
Yes, I've heard a lot about that. I want to see.
I mean, I straight up.
It's unquestionably a horror film. It's also unquestionably a science fiction film.
Yeah, it's got science fiction elements, and it's a thriller, I suppose you could say as well. There's not really supernatural elements to it, of course, but I think it comes in under the horror genre, and it's got a bit of sort of wry social commentary as well, I think. And that's why I think it did well in terms of Oscar nominations several years back.
Yeah, I love Get Out. Get Out is really good. I've actually been meaning to rewatch that one. I rewatched Us last night, actually. And I need to now rewatch Get Out. I kind of like went backwards through Jordan Peele's films recently.
What did you think of Nope? Because to me, that's one I liked it when I was watching it, but I have no desire to ever see it again. And I'm finding that opinion cropping up a lot.
That sounds about right to me, honestly. Like I liked it. It was good. It made good commentary. It wasn't that scary. There was really only one scene in it that I genuinely found scary enough to be like, oh, what's gonna happen? And then like
but that
after that I was like, oh, okay, now it just kind of feels like science fiction that also is dangerous and scary.
To me, what makes it horror is the autobiographical. I mean, the biographical stuff that they fictionalized about the monkey. All that's real. They just repositioned it on Stephen Yeun's character in the TV show.
Yeah.
But I mean, like when they show the woman in the bleachers, I mean, that's what that woman really looked like. I mean, she never got her fucking hands back. I mean, she got a face transplant, and I don't know if knowing that's the source of it made it more horrifying to me, or if it matters.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, because most people I've talked to knew where it came from, but some people
I haven't seen the film, but I have heard the story about the woman who had to get her face transplant.
Now that one scene,
I heard that one too.
That instantly makes it horror for me because chimps are terrifying.
Chimps are terrifying. I love them. I never
violent.
want to be in a room with one.
Yeah, I held a baby chimp once.
Than we are.
Oh.
They are.
Well, I know a lot of you guys
close.
hate it, but that's why Tim Burton made Tim Roth's villain in Planet of the Apes be one of the chimpanzees and not be as strict about, because they weren't strictly by cast in the novel either. There was more of a tendency in the novel, I think. And
but I do think Rod Serling's idea of making the species classes I thought was brilliant. That was brilliant.
But those
that is in the novel.
Me at all.
It's just not as strict as it is in the film.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you're right. Tim Burton was like, fuck Rod Serling. No, I'm kidding. But you're right. It's partially because of chimpanzees being that, potentially violent. And you don't think of them as violent as, say, a giant gorilla.
I held a baby chimpanzee in my arms once. This is back in the day when they didn't have things like safety codes or lawyers, I guess. And they would just pass this thing around, and I held it.
Oh my God.
And the only way I can describe is if a statue was covered in fur, that's what it felt like. The density, the muscle mass. And and I want to emphasize again, baby chimpanzee, when it, and I'm holding it, and it took my thumb and it just sort of pushed it away. There is nothing on earth that I could have done to stop it if it decided to make a wish and just tear my arms out of the socket.
Yeah.
They are phenomenally strong. We don't even know how much stronger they are, but I do know this. They will be hanging on a tree by one arm and see a berry. Oh, and they'll lift themselves up, grab the berry with about as much effort as I take a Kleenex out of a box.
Right.
Yeah.
One arm. Okay. Yeah. No. Hold a gun to my head and say, do a one arm and grab that cherry. Just shoot me. Just let's end this.
Chimpanzees are cute, but I do not want to hold one.
Yeah.
Do you find
nothing but love for the species? Do not want to be in.
Yes, please.
Nope.
Leave them alone.
Yep. Perfectly happy to leave those to the professionals who have safety stuff and are caring for them and doing all of the environmental preservation stuff.
I love animals.
I'll be over here with my books. My books are safe and only give me paper cuts occasionally.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of animals I see pictures of, and I'll be like, sometimes if it's like people at work, I notice they'll show you pictures of animals, like their pets, and then wild animals, and they're like, oh, wouldn't this be cool to have as a pet? And people do this a lot on TikTok too. And I'm like, oh, they're beautiful, but they'll rip your fucking face off. Yeah. I mean, but they are beautiful. They're beautiful.
All I want to see,
it's like all these YouTube videos of people with baby monkeys as pets, and they have to get rid of them because they're too dangerous.
Yep.
Yeah.
They are adorable.
I love lions. I think
but
lions
then there are all these people
creatures,
they actually killed those monkeys after they were pets, which they can't prove it, but people are those
every animal that can be a pet.
Those monkeys that you think are so cute in those videos are dead, and I don't know if that's true, but people are alleging that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't believe those people who want to have carrot cows and lynx and bobcats. It's at some point they're going to go out of control.
Yeah. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I had a friend who said she was in a special area at the Mulligan Library that she got in because she's a librarian, and she saw somebody come out into a courtyard with a Black Panther, in New York City.
Yep.
Oh my
God. And she was talking. She was
Black Panther.
To people who work. She was talking to the people who work at the Mulligan Library. It's yeah, we know that lady has a panther.
T'Challa, Wakanda forever.
Yes, we love Black Panther.
I do love Black Panther.
When you do that, Henry, though, you're going to have hooks on the ends of your hands because one day that cat just decides it's had enough. And
you're right. There is that.
When I first moved to New York, there was that story about the guy with the tiger and the alligator in his Harlem apartment. And I've actually, they took him out to, I don't know what happens to alligator, but I've seen the headstone for the tiger. There's an enormous
alligators are nothing to screw with.
No,
I don't want to be getting anywhere near
There's an enormous headstone
you don't mess with
honoring
alligators.
the tiger after he passed away. It's like twice the size of the gate to the sanctuary where they took him to.
Oh my God. So